Well, good morning. It's good to be with you on this Wednesday, June 10th, and thanks for tuning in. I am sitting out in our sun porch, and it's really steamy today, so I might have to look somewhere else for future places to broadcast from if it continues in the steaminess. It's supposed to be pretty stormy today, which never like any potential destruction from the storm, but I do love a good storm. Always reminds me of God's mighty power. Well, it's great to be with you, Cheryl, Carla, Jocelyn, Patricia, Beth, Peggy, and TJ. Good to have all of you with us this morning. My name is Pastor Kristen, and I'm the pastor at West Morris Street Free Methodist Church in Indianapolis. And when this whole COVID crisis started, I actually began going live every morning for daily devotions. And I didn't have any sort of long-term plan with it. It wasn't any sort of thought out long-term goal or anything, but it just developed where it was a time of coming together every day. For a while, I would do it kind of just whenever it happened to work, and then switched it to being regularly at 10 o'clock so people could plan for it, and did that right up until about the second week of May, and then needed to take about a month break for just allowing my body to recover and recoup and get healthy again. So this week is the first week back with being regularly on, and in the past, and I'd encourage you to look back at those if you didn't see them. Initially, we were talking about just whatever scriptures happened to be in the lectionary reading that day, and then the last couple of weeks leading up to May, I was really trying to teach some skills so that you could take those and apply them in your own Bible reading, in your own devotional time, or just take them and teach them to other people. I think it's really important that we not become dependent on getting the word from somebody else. And so I always hesitate doing this because I don't want to create that situation at all, but hopefully empower you to feel empowered to open the scripture and go to God and know that that you can do that as well. So, but this week, as I restarted, I wanted to start digging into a really important document that is very apropos time-wise to the situation that we have going on right now. So last year at General Conference, the Free Methodist Church passed a document putting it into our book of discipline that's called The Dignity and Worth of Persons. And it is the statement about how Free Methodists engage around the topics of the dignity and worth of persons. It's specifically in regards to racism and racial justice. So we're just spending some time walking through that and looking through it. On Monday, we began, and we're talking about how God's salvific, God's love, his salvific acts are for all of humanity, not just Israel as God's chosen people. And we were in Acts 10 in the encounter with Peter and Cornelius. And then yesterday, we were talking about that all people are made in God's image, which was from Genesis 1, where God creates humankind and says it is very good. So today we're on to the second sentence. We haven't made it very far, but we're on to the second sentence in the statement about the dignity and worth of all persons. And I'll go ahead and put that link so you can read the entire statement yourself. I'll put that in the comments when I'm done so you could go back and look at that yourself. But I will just go ahead and start where we are at. And the sentence that we're going to focus on today is the second paragraph. It's the first sentence of that second paragraph. And it says this: the Old Testament law commands such respect. And that's referencing back to the previous sentence where we say that we are going to respect people who are made in the image of God and are redeemed by Christ's death and resurrection. And so the sentence we're going to look at today says the Old Testament law commands such respect. Well, when this statement was written, all of the statements are backed up by scripture. And so the scripture for this sentence, the Old Testament law commands such respect, is actually Deuteronomy 5:11-21, which if you recognize that reference, that is one of the places that the Ten Commandments is recorded in the Old Testament. And so you might think, well, that's an interesting place to direct our steps when we're talking about respecting people, respecting all people. But that's where we're going to go today. And, there's a lot of great teaching on the dignity and worth of all persons. And so I'd encourage you to look into that. There's great teaching actually about the 10 Commandments as well. I'd encourage you to look into that if you want to dig in deeper. But, when I think about the 10 Commandments, it really is about the proper ordering of ourselves and God. It's a proper ordering of our minds and our attitudes. It's a proper ordering of our stuff. It's a proper ordering of our perspective in relation to God and who He is. And so I think all of the 10 Commandments create this worldview, create this way of being God's people. And if you think about it, these were given to Israel after God delivered them out of slavery, delivered them out of hundreds of years of being slaves in Egypt, delivered them out of being under an oppressor's hand where they had really no say in how they engaged, how they created culture. And so now God is creating a people to whom He has promised to be their God, and He's invited them to be His people. And so He is establishing community. And as He outlines laws and guidelines, He's saying, this is the type of community that I desire my people to be in. This type of community will reflect who I am to the world. It'll reflect my love and my care and my grace and my justice and my righteousness to a watching world. And so the 10 Commandments are simply one small part of God creating that world that He is creating that reflects who He is. And so we want to look at the 10 Commandments and just briefly touch on them. I think really the 10 Commandments can be broken down into two big ideas. The first is that God matters, and the second is that community matters. God matters and community matters. And so we're just going to briefly look at each of those. So under the topic of God matters, the very first commandment we see is the one about not taking the Lord's name in vain. Now, often that has been taught as, don't swear, don't, when you get mad and you hit your thumb with the hammer, don't use His name as an expletive. But I think it's much deeper than that. I think this first commandment, and I taught about this, I don't know, sometime, I can't remember when it was. But this first command to not misuse God's name is really more broadly about we are not to go about doing things in an evil, sinful way and then attach God's name to it and somehow think that those sinful, wrongful, ungodly actions suddenly become holy, suddenly become okay because we've attached God's name to it. So obviously, we're not to use God's name as we swear or in any sort of expletives or anything like that. But even more than that, the idea of the first commandment and this big idea that God matters is not to attach God's name to unholy things and somehow think that they become holy. The truth of the matter is, and this is a constant reckoning, I think that all of us as humanity constantly wrestle with, is that we are to come under God's ways. God doesn't come under our ways. We are to come under God's ways. God doesn't come under ours. And, there's often this question as we endeavor to reach into new things, even new ministries, is this important question that I think we need to wrestle with is, are we doing what God has called us to do and that He'll bless us as we do that? Or are we doing our own thing and then asking God to bless us? And there's a slight distinction there, but it's an important one. Are we doing what God has called us to do, where God is always already acting, where God is already moving, and are we coming alongside Him? Or are we doing our own thing and then invoking God's name and asking Him to bless that? That's obviously not what is intended in the proper way of engaging in ministry. So that's the first commandment. The second commandment also falls under this big heading of God matters, and it's related to Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath, there's lots of debate and discussion about, does Sabbath still pertain to us? Is Sabbath a Sunday now on the day of worship? I can tell you as a pastor, Sunday is definitely not a Sabbath. It's a fully on work day. But the whole idea of Sabbath, a Sabbath rest, is that the world is not dependent on us being in control. And once a week, we have to step back from our desire to control and hold tight to everything and just let go and allow God to be in control. Now, we know God is always in control, but isn't it true that we operate in this world often as if we are in control? And sometimes we hold on so tight to the things that we're in charge of that letting go for even one day just feels like the world's going to fall apart. And God just constantly is working and helping us reorder our priorities, and that always reminding us that actually I'm in control and you can trust me. In fact, you can trust me so much, you can take a whole day off. And that day off, you can be about family, you can be about worship, and you can be about rejoining with this relationship that I desire to have with you. I love that the Sabbath law has application, very broad application. So it applies not just to Israel, which is really interesting because remember, God's trying to create this new society, but he says, no, it's going to apply not just to the adults, it's going to apply to the children. It's not going to apply just to Israel that are free. It's going to apply if you have servants. It's going to apply to all of your animals, including your work animals, which the only reason that they would have taken the money and the expense and the time to care for those animals is simply to get work out of them. And those work animals also were to take a Sabbath. And it also applies to foreigners. And so this is a very broad statement. It's God declaring that, you know what, I am in control and you can trust me. And in Deuteronomy, we read the reminder from God to his people that, remember, I took you up out of Egypt. You once were slaves, but you are no longer. And it's him saying, you know, don't act like a slave. Don't act like a slave who constantly has to labor and work and has no time for rest and no time to reconnect with me, your God, and remember who truly is in control. And we say that, don't we? We say, oh, he's a slave to his job. She's a slave to her phone. And that's in direct contrast to what God invites us to do and to be about, is to truly rest and trust that he can be in control and that he is. So those are the two commandments that really, in my mind, fall under the idea that God matters. The bigger section is about community matters. And this isn't a degree of more importance because there's more commandments. I think it's a degree of, remember, this group of people are establishing what it means to be a people. And so God is very careful to explain what it looks like. So under the commandments, under the big idea that community matters, God is saying that I desire for you to create a safe, honest, trusting environment in which you'll engage with honesty with one another, that you'll exhibit goodwill toward one another. There won't be jealousy or greed, and you will want the best, not for yourself, but for each other. And so then he specifies what that looks like. And so one of the specifications is that you'll take care of your parents. And it's God's reminder that, we are never just independent beings in this world, that we are engaged with one another. And it's never the case where we don't need someone. We're past that. We're too old. We're independent now. But God says, no, in order to create this community that matters, there's going to be places and ways that I'm going to expect you to take care of each other. And part of doing that, one way of doing that, is to look after and respect and honor our parents. It's our job. It's our job to contribute to a community that is strong and healthy. The other one of the other ones that he talks about is murder. You shall not murder. And it's as if God just over and over again says, and you can see this all throughout Leviticus too, that life matters. The life that contains the breath of God matters. The life that embodies the image of God matters. The life that reflects the design of God matters. The life that is the very creation of God matters. And so God values life in this community and calls us to as well. So as we think about the 10 Commandments, and there are others as well that I didn't touch on, and they all fall under this community matters of how do you create this safe, life-giving, honest, trustworthy environment in which people can thrive, in which we care more about one another than ourselves. God is saying, I matter and community matters. And that's how you create the society that I desire you to live in, and that I desire would reflect to the rest of the world who I am. So we've talked a lot in the last couple of days. We hear it a lot in society about Black Lives Matter. And as I was thinking about these 10 Commandments, that God matters and community matters, and certainly the statement that Black life matters certainly fits 100% within the idea that community matters. And there are times and places all throughout our history where we've had to acknowledge that there are situations, there are people where some group, some subsection, some age group, some gender, some culture says, you know what, right now, I don't feel like I matter. I don't feel like I'm included in this community. And we who are not part of that group, it compels us, because community matters, to listen, to truly listen to what it is that they're saying, to their honest stories, and not focus just on how that makes us feel uncomfortable, but really listen with our heart and say, how can I honestly evaluate who I am and who our society is and who our culture is and who our community is, so that I don't have that entire group of people saying, I don't feel like I matter right now. If as parents, one of our children came to us and said, you know, I just don't feel like I matter in this family. Like, you don't even care about me. We wouldn't say, oh, you're fine. Come on, go unload the dishwasher. We would embrace them, and we would remind them that they truly do matter. And so as we look at the 10 Commandments and re-emphasize and remind ourselves that God matters and community matters, every discussion that's going on today fits fully within that. And so as we finish up this morning, I just want to finish where we started, and that the Old Testament the Old Testament law commands such respect. And I would just say that's an interesting sentence to be included in the dignity and worth of persons. I would say that respect is the absolute minimum that we're going for. It's the absolute minimum for how we're to engage others. We're actually supposed to love one another, pray for one another, encourage one another, support one another, admonish one another, greet one another. The New Testament is filled with all sorts of one another's about how we're to be with our brothers and sisters. And so respect, gosh, that's just like starting place. And then we can go from there. And so I'd encourage you this morning, as you think about this, as you dig into Deuteronomy 5, verses 11 to 21, and then also maybe spend some time with the statement about dignity and worth of all persons, that God would open our eyes about the ways that we can more and more create and be part of creating a community where God matters and community matters, and all people truly feel welcome and included in that community, because that is what God has always intended. Well, it's been great to be with you. It seems like 17, 18 minutes is the magic number. And so thanks for hanging in with me. It's been a little bit longer than I have been doing in the past. I pray that it's helpful for you. And just want to mention one thing. On Sunday nights, I'm going to be starting to teach a discipleship class. And we're just going to, for 6 weeks, meet on Zoom at 7 o'clock. Everybody's invited and included. We will be learning 3 different simple, easy discipleship tools. And we'll be practicing them ourselves, so growing in our own discipleship. And then those tools will be very easy takeaways without things to buy or big expensive programs to implement. Those tools you can then take and use with a group of people that you're discipling, and you can teach them, and it can just multiply out. So I'd encourage you to be part of that discipleship class. I'll put something in the comments for information about how to sign up. Have a great day. Love being with you, and we'll check in with you tomorrow. Bye-bye.